Ladies and gentlemen, in the course of life, we form bonds, connections, and relationships with individuals who become integral to our daily existence. These relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendships, hold the power to shape our emotions, actions, and choices. But what happens when a relationship no longer serves our growth? What happens when holding on does more harm than letting go? The process of emotional detachment is one of the most challenging and delicate undertakings we may ever face. It calls for a deep understanding of the self, an unwavering sense of purpose, and a willingness to heal. Detaching from someone emotionally is not an act of cruelty, nor is it a sign of weakness. Rather, it is an exercise in self-preservation, growth, and respect for both ourselves and the other person involved. Today, we will explore the path to emotional detachment. A path that, when walked wisely, allows us to reclaim our inner peace and renew our sense of self-worth. This is not a journey meant to erase memories or destroy bonds, but rather to reshape our emotional landscape in a way that honors our personal development. Let us now reflect on the rules that guide us toward emotional detachment steps that can transform not only how we relate to others, but also how we relate to ourselves. Acknowledge the need for detachment. The first step in emotionally detaching from someone is acknowledging that such a process is necessary. Often we find ourselves holding on to relationships for far longer than we should, out of fear of the unknown or the discomfort of change. But there comes a point where we must honestly assess whether the relationship is contributing to our well-being or undermining it. Emotional detachment is not something that happens overnight, nor does it happen without a sense of clarity. We must look at the situation with open eyes and recognize when our emotional investment has become counterproductive. Acknowledging the need for detachment requires deep introspection. You must ask yourself difficult questions. Are you constantly feeling drained in this relationship? Are you sacrificing your mental and emotional health for the sake of preserving a connection that no longer serves you? Sometimes the answers are painful, but they are necessary for growth. Once you understand that detachment is needed, it becomes easier to begin the process of letting go. However, this requires the courage to face the reality that not all relationships are meant to last indefinitely. Furthermore, acknowledging the need for detachment is also about accepting the impermanence of life. Relationships evolve, people change, and sometimes the dynamics we once cherished no longer align with who we are becoming. It's essential to understand that this is not a failure on anyone's part. Rather, it's a natural progression of life. Detachment is not about erasing the past, but about creating a healthier emotional future. By recognizing the need for detachment, you honor your emotional integrity and set the stage for healing. In some cases, the need for detachment becomes evident when the relationship begins to limit your growth. When you feel as though you can no longer be yourself, or when your aspirations and dreams are compromised by the relationship, it's time to consider stepping back. Emotional detachment offers an opportunity to regain your autonomy and reconnect with the core of who you are. Acknowledging this need is an act of self-love, a declaration that you are worthy of peace, fulfillment, and growth. Lastly, acknowledgement also means understanding that detachment doesn't equate to abandonment. It doesn't mean that you care any less for the person, but it does mean that you are prioritizing your emotional well-being. It's about finding balance, about creating space for both your needs and your emotions. This first step may be the hardest, but it is also the most liberating, as it opens the door to healing and transformation. Create emotional boundaries. After acknowledging the need for emotional detachment, the next step is to establish clear emotional boundaries. Boundaries are essential in any relationship, but when detaching, they become even more critical. Setting boundaries allows you to protect your emotional space and ensures that you don't continue to invest in a relationship that no longer nurtures your spirit. Boundaries aren't just about limiting physical contact or communication. They're also about regulating your emotional energy and what you allow into your heart. Establishing emotional boundaries can be a difficult task, especially if you've been emotionally intertwined with someone for a long time. However, boundaries are essential for your mental health and personal growth. It's important to define what you will and will not tolerate moving forward. Perhaps this means limiting the time you spend with the person or avoiding certain conversations that trigger emotional responses. The key is to ensure that your emotional energy is no longer excessively drained by this relationship. Creating boundaries also requires you to communicate your intentions clearly. This doesn't mean you have to explain every detail of your decision to detach, but you do need to express that you are prioritizing your emotional health. Often, people resist boundaries because they see them as barriers. But in truth, boundaries are tools that create healthier interactions. They protect you from further emotional harm and help you transition out of unhealthy patterns. Another essential aspect of setting boundaries is consistency. Once you establish a boundary, it's crucial to maintain it. If you waver, the emotional detachment process becomes more challenging. People often test boundaries consciously or unconsciously, and it's up to you to stand firm in your decisions. Emotional detachment requires discipline, and setting boundaries is a way to exercise that discipline in a way that promotes healing. As you establish boundaries, you may also realize that your relationship with the person changes dramatically. This is natural as boundaries redefine how you interact with one another. Sometimes the other person may not understand or accept your need for boundaries, but that is not your burden to carry. Emotional detachment is about prioritizing your well-being, not managing the emotions of others. By setting clear boundaries, you reclaim your emotional autonomy and empower yourself to move forward. Finally, remember that boundaries are not about isolation. They are about creating healthy emotional distance. You are not building walls around your heart, but you are ensuring that your heart is protected from further harm. Boundaries allow you to maintain a sense of control over your emotional state, ensuring that you are not continuously affected by the emotional dynamics of the relationship you are detaching from. Limit communication gradually. One of the most practical steps in emotionally detaching from someone is to gradually limit communication. Cutting ties abruptly may not be realistic or healthy, especially if you share responsibilities or social circles with the person. However, by gradually reducing the amount and intensity of your interactions, you allow yourself to create emotional space without causing unnecessary conflict or confusion. Limiting communication doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be as simple as choosing not to respond immediately to messages or deciding to step back from initiating contact. By creating intentional gaps in communication, you give yourself the emotional space needed to start the healing process. This distance will allow you to reflect on your feelings and begin to detach emotionally without the constant reminder of the person's presence in your life. Over time, as communication becomes less frequent, you may notice a shift in how you feel about the person. Detachment doesn't mean that you stop caring about them, but it does mean that their influence on your emotions becomes less significant. Gradually limiting communication allows you to wean yourself off the emotional dependence that may have developed in the relationship. It's a subtle but effective way to regain control over your emotional state. This step is particularly important in situations where cutting communication entirely may not be possible or desirable. For instance, if you share children, work, or mutual friendships, there will be unavoidable points of contact. The goal then is not to eliminate all communication, but to ensure that your emotional investment in these interactions diminishes. By focusing on neutral, non-emotional communication, you create a buffer between your feelings and the interaction itself. It's also crucial to be mindful of how you use communication tools such as social media. Sometimes, even when direct communication is limited, the temptation to check in on the person through social platforms can hinder your detachment process. If necessary, unfollow or mute their updates to prevent emotional triggers. The objective is just to reduce emotional ties in all forms of communication so you can focus on your healing journey. Lastly, understand that reducing communication is a form of self-care. It's not about punishing the other person or retreating into isolation, but about giving yourself the emotional room to breathe. Each step you take towards limiting communication is a step towards reclaiming your emotional autonomy. This gradual process allows you to detach with grace and dignity without creating unnecessary strife. Focus on self-care and personal growth. As you begin the process of detaching from someone emotionally, it's essential to shift your focus towards self-care and personal growth. Detachment creates a void, an emotional gap that was once filled by your connection to another person. To avoid feeling lost or overwhelmed, you must fill that space with activities and habits that nurture your spirit and foster personal development. Self-care takes many forms. It can be physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. The key is to prioritize activities that make you feel centered and empowered. This could be anything from exercise and meditation to pursuing a new hobby or spending more time in nature. By focusing on yourself, you gradually shift your emotional investment from the person you are detaching from to your own well-being. Personal growth is an integral part of the detachment process. When you emotionally invest in someone, parts of your identity may become intertwined with theirs. Detachment then is an opportunity to rediscover yourself. Who are you outside of this relationship? What dreams, passions, and goals have you neglected while focusing on the other person? Now is the time to pursue those aspects of your life with renewed vigor. Personal growth is not just a distraction from the pain of detachment, it's a way to reclaim your sense of purpose and direction. Another crucial aspect of focusing on self-care and growth is the development of emotional resilience. Detaching from someone can be emotionally draining, and without proper care, you risk falling into patterns of sadness, anxiety, or regret. By prioritizing your well-being, you build resilience against these negative emotions. You learn to nurture your inner strength and maintain a sense of balance, even in the face of emotional challenges. Engaging in self-care also helps you cultivate a healthier emotional perspective. Detachment is not about rejection or withdrawal, but about honoring your emotional boundaries. When you invest in yourself, you begin to see detachment as an act of self-respect rather than a loss. You understand that your emotional health is just as important as the relationship you once cherished. Lastly, self-care and personal growth are about reclaiming your emotional energy. By focusing on activities that bring you joy and fulfillment, you redirect the emotional energy that was once tied up in the relationship. This energy can now be used to build a healthier relationship with yourself, one that is rooted in self-love, confidence, and inner peace. Reflect on the lessons learned. As you journey through the process of emotional detachment, it's important to reflect on the lessons that the relationship has taught you. Every relationship, whether successful or not, offers valuable insights into who we are, what we need, and how we relate to others. Detachment is not just about moving on, it's about learning from the experience and using those lessons to grow. Reflection is a powerful tool for emotional healing. It allows you to process the emotions and experiences tied to the relationship so you can gain a deeper understanding of yourself. What did this relationship teach you about love, trust, or vulnerability? What patterns emerged in your behavior, and how can you improve moving forward? These reflections not only aid in the detachment process, but also help you avoid repeating the same mistakes in future relationships. Through reflection, you also gain clarity on the reasons for detachment. Often, in the midst of emotional pain, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. Reflection helps you step back and see the relationship in its entirety, including the positive and negative aspects. This clarity is crucial for emotional detachment, as it reinforces your decision to let go and move forward. You come to understand that detachment is not an act of rejection, but a necessary step toward emotional freedom. Moreover, reflecting on the lessons learned helps you approach future relationships with greater wisdom and awareness. Emotional detachment is not about building walls around your heart, but about learning how to engage in healthier, more balanced connections. By understanding the dynamics of your previous relationship, you equip yourself with the tools to create more fulfilling and nurturing bonds in the future. Reflection also fosters forgiveness both of yourself and the other person. Emotional detachment can stir up feelings of guilt, anger, or resentment, especially if the relationship ended on difficult terms. But through reflection, you can come to terms with these emotions and release them. Forgiveness is an essential part of the healing process, allowing you to move forward without carrying the weight of unresolved emotions. Finally, remember that the lessons you learn through detachment are not just about the relationship itself, but about your own emotional journey. Each experience you have in life contributes to your growth, and emotional detachment is no exception. By reflecting on the lessons learned, you transform what may have been a painful experience into an opportunity for self-discovery and empowerment. Allow yourself time to heal. Emotional detachment is a process, not an event. It requires time, patience, and understanding. One of the most important rules for detaching from someone emotionally is to give yourself the time and space to heal. Healing is not linear, it comes in waves with moments of clarity and moments of emotional turbulence. Understanding this will help you navigate the process with grace and compassion for yourself. It's crucial to recognize that healing doesn't have a fixed timeline. The depth of your emotional attachment to the person, the length of the relationship, and the circumstances surrounding your detachment will all influence how long it takes to heal. Be patient with yourself and avoid rushing the process. Healing requires time, and detaching emotionally from someone you once cared about is not something that can be forced. During the healing process, it's important to embrace your emotions rather than suppress them. Allow yourself to feel the sadness, the frustration, and even the anger. These emotions are a natural part of detachment, and by acknowledging them, you give yourself permission to heal. Emotional pain is a signal that something significant has occurred in your life, and it deserves to be honored, not ignored. Additionally, surround yourself with a support system during your healing process. Emotional detachment can be isolating, but you don't have to go through it alone. Whether it's friends, family, or a therapist, having people who understand and support your journey can make all the difference. They can offer perspective, encouragement, and comfort when the process feels overwhelming. Healing also involves self-compassion. Too often, people blame themselves for the end of a relationship or for needing to detach emotionally. But detachment is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of growth. Be kind to yourself as you navigate this process. Celebrate the small victories and remind yourself that emotional healing takes time. Each step you take, no matter how small, is a step toward a healthier emotional state. Finally, remember that healing is about more than just getting over the person, it's about rebuilding your emotional foundation. As you heal, you will emerge stronger, more self-aware, and more resilient. Emotional detachment is not the end of your journey. It's a chapter in your ongoing story of growth and transformation. Allow yourself the time to heal and trust that you are on the path to emotional freedom. Understand the importance of emotional boundaries. In life, we often lose sight of our personal boundaries when we are deeply attached to someone. Emotional boundaries are the invisible lines that define where our emotions end and the emotions of another person begin. Without these boundaries, we start to take on their problems, their burdens, and their emotions as our own. Emotional boundaries protect us from becoming overwhelmed by someone else's emotional state. They allow us to keep our sense of identity intact and provide the foundation for healthy detachment. Setting emotional boundaries begins with self-awareness. You must recognize when you are overextending yourself emotionally for someone else. When we invest too much of our emotional energy into another person, we lose control over our own emotional health. The moment you feel responsible for someone else's happiness or their struggles, it is a sign that your boundaries are being crossed. It is essential to acknowledge that you can be supportive without becoming emotionally enmeshed. Once you've identified where your emotional boundaries have been blurred, you must have the courage to establish new limits. This might mean reducing contact, limiting conversations that are emotionally draining, or even stepping back entirely. It's important to remember that this process is not about abandoning others, but about prioritizing your emotional well-being. You can still care for someone while ensuring that their emotional turbulence does not become your burden. At first, establishing these boundaries may feel selfish or harsh, especially if you've been deeply connected to someone. However, the truth is that setting boundaries is a form of self-respect and self-preservation. It's about reclaiming control over your emotional life. You are not responsible for the emotional chaos of others, and by enforcing boundaries, you ensure that your own peace remains intact. Detaching emotionally doesn't mean cutting people off abruptly or with cruelty. It's about creating a space where you can thrive emotionally even when someone you care about is struggling. It's about protecting your emotional energy from being depleted by situations or people you cannot control. Boundaries are essential tools for emotional detachment because they serve as a reminder that you have the right to protect your emotional world. In the end, learning to set emotional boundaries is a continuous process. You may need to adjust them over time as your relationship with the person evolves. However, by being intentional about creating and maintaining these boundaries, you'll find that emotional detachment becomes a natural and empowering part of your life. Accept that changes are inevitable. One of the most challenging aspects of emotional attachment is the difficulty in accepting change. We become so deeply tied to the idea of what a relationship should be that we resist any shift in its nature. But life is full of change, and emotional detachment requires that you embrace the fact that change is inevitable. Holding on to the past only causes more pain. To detach emotionally, you must learn to let go of what once was and accept what is now. Resisting change often stems from a fear of the unknown. When we are emotionally attached to someone, we build a comfort zone around their presence in our lives. Even if the relationship is no longer fulfilling or healthy, the idea of letting go seems unbearable because it forces us to confront uncertainty. But the reality is that all relationships evolve, and sometimes they fade. By accepting that change is part of life, you can begin to emotionally detach with grace and wisdom. Detachment is not about erasing the memories or pretending the relationship never existed. It's about understanding that its season has passed and the dynamics have shifted. This acceptance allows you to stop holding on to what could have been and start living in the present. Clinging to a past version of the relationship only anchors you in emotional turmoil, preventing you from moving forward. As you come to terms with the reality of change, you will find that the grip of emotional attachment loosens. The more you resist the natural flow of life, the harder it becomes to let go. But when you surrender to the process of change, you free yourself from the emotional weight that keeps you stuck in the past. You allow yourself to grow and evolve, even if that means moving forward without the person to whom you were once attached. Change can be painful, but it is also an opportunity for personal growth. Every shift in a relationship teaches us something about ourselves, our values, and our capacity for resilience. When you accept change as an inevitable part of life, you open the door to new possibilities and relationships that align with who you are becoming. Emotional detachment, in this sense, is about trusting that the future holds more for you than the past ever could. Ultimately, accepting change is a necessary part of emotional detachment because it liberates you from the chains of attachment. It empowers you to move forward with confidence, knowing that while the relationship may have changed, your emotional strength and sense of self remain intact. Practice emotional self-reliance. Emotional attachment often stems from a dependency on others for validation, support, or happiness. One of the most powerful steps in emotionally detaching from someone is learning to become emotionally self-reliant. This doesn't mean isolating yourself or rejecting relationships altogether, but rather cultivating the inner strength to stand on your own emotionally. When we are emotionally attached, we tend to look to others to fill the gaps in our emotional needs. We rely on their presence, their approval, or their affection to feel complete. But true emotional freedom comes from within. To detach from someone emotionally, you must first develop a sense of inner fulfillment. This involves building a strong relationship with yourself, one where you are enough, regardless of anyone else's input. Self-reliance begins with self-awareness. You must take the time to understand your own emotional triggers, needs, and desires. By doing so, you can start to meet these needs independently without depending on someone else to validate your emotions. This doesn't mean you have to navigate life entirely alone, but it does mean that your emotional well-being is not solely tied to the presence or approval of another person. As you become more emotionally self-reliant, you will notice a shift in your attachments. The more you rely on yourself to fulfill your emotional needs, the less dependent you become on others to make you feel whole. This creates space for emotional detachment because you are no longer clinging to someone out of a fear of emotional lack. Instead, you can engage in relationships from a place of abundance, knowing that your emotional stability is rooted in yourself. Building emotional self-reliance also means developing a sense of inner peace. When you are at peace with yourself, you are less likely to be swayed by the emotional turbulence of others. You become more grounded, more centered, and less reactive to external emotional drama. This internal stability is crucial for emotional detachment because it allows you to remain calm and composed even when relationships shift or end. In the end, emotional self-reliance is about reclaiming your power. It is about recognizing that you are responsible for your own emotional health and that no one else can fulfill that role for you. As you cultivate this inner strength, emotional detachment becomes not only possible, but a natural extension of your personal growth. Emotional detachment is one of the most profound acts of self-love and growth. It is not a process to be feared, but rather embraced with courage and wisdom. By acknowledging the need for detachment, setting boundaries, limiting communication, focusing on self-care, reflecting on lessons learned, and allowing time to heal, you empower yourself to move forward with grace. Emotional detachment is not the end of a relationship, it is the beginning of a renewed relationship with yourself, one rooted in peace, fulfillment, and emotional freedom. As you walk this path, know that you are not only reclaiming your heart, but also rediscovering the strength within you to live a life that is truly your own.